I know. And I want to talk a little bit about chunking. Now, you look at this and like, that's a really strange name for learning, but it's actually the correct name for it. And it's the idea of breaking up concepts into smaller, more manageable parts. Now, when we talk about our learning, we actually have a limit of what we learn. And that limit defines a lot of what we do. We have 3 to 5 concepts that we can understand, and that's it. No more. In a single learning interval, whether it's a lecture or a study session, we're going to be able to understand 3 to 5 concepts, and our brain's going to push the rest to the side. And it varies a little bit on each person, but it's still this restricted, limited amount because our brain has to specialize and focus for learning. So when you study, you really need to break these concepts into smaller amounts. So let's go ahead and take a moment and look at a few examples on how we can do this for our study sessions. So I'm sitting here reviewing lists. I'm going to iterate through lists, inserting elements, adding elements, and I take a break, probably about 20 minutes. A 20-minute break is a healthy break to have your brain and your chemicals in your brain try and reinforce everything that's going on. Neuroscience talks about this a lot. And you go back to study. And now I'm going to look at iteration again with a while loop. And I'm updating and deleting elements. So it's still related to my first session. But then I take a break and I once again go over these topics. So I might do 90-20, 90-20. So it depends on where you're at. And this helps us learn better. Let's look at another example where we focus on interleaving. So I'm learning lists and I want to review and read code. I want to write code. I want to look at some general concepts as I do this. And then once again, I take a break. And then I'm learning objects and I want to review, I want to write more code. And then I say, how can I combine objects and lists together? So I'm purposely building a connection between the two study sessions. And yes, they're different topics, but this idea of interleaving ideas is strong and it's powerful. And once again, between both, I make sure I take a break. So these are 2 ways in which you can look at your study habits. But we're computer scientists. Can this help us improve our programming? And the answer is yes, it will help us improve our programming, and it's even something expected in industry. So in rule for code reviews in industry, 1 line, 1 operation, do 1 thing at a time. They want readability because they know multiple people are looking at your code. In practice, it actually ends up being 1 to 3 connected ideas. Once again, our brain likes to chunk things up into smaller values. So we keep it simple, and we're often asked to refactor code that's made too complex into these simple ideas. And as always, when you're learning functions, they say you should have 1 topic or 1 purpose. That is critical when you're doing code reviews. And that's the feedback that you'll get is have these code reviews for this one code or this practice. So let's go ahead and take these concepts and we're going to look at some code. And when we look at some code, we're going to be thinking, how can I break this up? Now this example goes relatively quick. I encourage you to pull out your own code and take a look at it and say, how can I break this up into smaller, easier concepts to make it easier to read? So the problem I was presented here was, you're given a list. It's a list of cities separated by semicolons and GPS coordinates. And you need to return the city with the decimal coordinate. The GPS coordinates were in degree second or degree minute second. And I've done this. I completed the assignment. I did my 1 function. I printed it all out. This is my requirement. And I've met it. It meets what they've told me to do. And I've gone through and I've checked it. It works. But it's sort of complicated. And even more to the point, first things first, you're going to notice I'm looking at this code. And I take a look at this code, I'm going to notice that I am repeating myself. I have 4 lines of code that are exactly copy and paste, just changing the variable. Whenever you do that, write a function. Seriously, whenever you do that, write a function. So I've written this function here, and for time I just insert it on in. And now I can replace this repeated code with a function. And automatically you can see that if I had an error in this, maybe I did east-west instead of southwest, or south and west for my list of negative coordinates, that I could fix it in one spot and overall. And then I look at my list completion here, and I look at it and say, all right, so I'm doing 2 things, and I'm splitting it by the semicolon, and I'm splitting it by the comma. Maybe I actually should just split by the semicolon first. Remember, 1 thing at a time. And I could call the cities, I call it coordinates examples, and so it's X for X, and then I split it by the semicolon, and it just splits every city in out. So then I am looking at dealing and building a single tuple at a time. And as I'm building a single tuple at a time, I can go ahead and say, all right, we're building this tuple. I'm going to go ahead and pull it from this coordinates list that I set up. So I can say 4, n, and I can go ahead and build it from there. And right away, this is easier to read. I get an idea and I say, you know what? I can read this. This is a bit easier. I can look at it. I can add comments. And these comments say this does this does that. I know what each line does. And yes, there's a little bit more going on than one thing at a time, but it's still very clear to read and understand. Now, if I critically look at this, I'd probably say there's other things that I could make. There's other things that I could fix. I'll let you pause and think about what are some other things I could fix to make this code clear? Am I repeating myself? Have I failed to keep my code dry? Don't repeat yourself. And the answer is, yeah, right up in this new function I built, since I copied and pasted and just changed the variable to make a more uniform variable, I probably could go ahead and make this easier, especially in that degree symbol. You notice I'm doing it more than once, and same at the minute symbol, I'm doing it more than once. So I can say, all right, I'm going to create a variable for this, so I only have to run find once, which, by the way, find could be an expensive operation. In this case, it wouldn't be because we know it's a smaller list, but it could be an expensive one. And so now I can say, all right, degree location, great. I can do the same thing for my minute location, and I can go ahead and find the minutes in there. And there's different ways you can do it. Some people say, well, there's spaces in the original list. Could be, maybe there is, maybe there isn't. I do know for GPS coordinates, if I'm doing it from the degree minutes, those are guaranteed to be in the lists. Versus decimal one, they're not, but I'm converting it to decimal. And just to make it easier to read, I probably should do the same thing with seconds. Technically, not required, but I could do it with seconds and make my life easier to read on it. And now I've set up a standard format where I say, here's all the things. Here's my coordinates that I grabbed. Here's my mathematical notation. Someone could point out that since I'm going to multiple lines on this return, I could probably break that up into other variables and then do my math all together. That's valid. Once again, 1 to 2 things or 3 things at a time to try and keep my code contained. So let's review. Study sessions should be in blocks of 3. Take a break, really a 20-minute rest. It helps your brain really refresh. Code reviews. When you look at your own code, try to break it up into 3 to 5 line increments. Mark it out on a piece of paper if you're printing out trying to understand code. Seek understanding of these 3 to 5 lines and then assemble it back together. In a coding session, keep it to 1 to 3 operations. One thing at a time is what they always tell you, but really 1 to 3 operations. Write a few lines, run it, compile it, keep it simple, and keep this iterative process. Chunk your coding. It sounds strange, but 1 to 3 operations, review often, and then repeat. Thank you.